This afternoon we're looking at part 2 of the glires clade. The glires, remember the glires includes the rodentia, but also the lagomorphs, the rabbits, hares and picas. So the order rodentia, of course, is much more speciose with over 2,500 species and comprising about 45% of all mammals. By contrast, the lagomorphs are not that speciose at all, but they're still a very important group. There are about 92 species known worldwide of rabbits, hares and picas. There are 29 species of picas alone. We will get back to those in a moment. Only 2 in North America. Most of them are in Eurasia, in montane or plateau areas of Eurasia. We've only got specimens for 4 species here. They're all listed on your handout. On your handout here, we're dealing with the family Ochotonidae, the picas, and the family Leporidae, the hares and rabbits. And in the picas, we've just got 1 species, Ochotona princeps. And for the Leporidae, we have the black-tailed jackrabbit, Lepus californicus, and we've got 2 cottontails, the desert cottontail, Silvilagus auduboni, and the brush rabbit, Silvilagus bachmani. The latter is an endangered species with which we do a lot of work. So I'm going to talk briefly about these specimens here, introduce you to them, but I encourage you to study up on these taxa with regard to their life history and ecology and so on. California, like I said, there's about 92 species worldwide of lagomorphs, and California is pretty diverse when it comes to the lagomorphs. There are 8 native species of lagomorphs in California, and there are also some feral populations of European rabbits here as well, bringing it up to 9 species. So that's about 10% of the species diversity of lagomorphs in the world can be found in the state of California. So 8 native species and the introduced European rabbit. I've just got 4 of those 8 native species here. 3 of them, the black-tailed jackrabbit, the desert cottontail, and the brush rabbit, can all be found on the San Joaquin River National Wildlife Refuge, which is, and that is really unusual. And if you're really lucky, you could get photos of all 3 of these species within 20-30 minutes, just in the parking lot at that San Joaquin River National Wildlife Refuge. And I call that the Lagomorph Grand Slam, to be able to accomplish that. I've accomplished it once, so I was lucky at the time. So, first we're going to look at the picas. So we're dealing with, again, well, before I mention that again, just recap, we're dealing with the clade glires, order Lagomorpha. We've already dealt with the order rodentia. And we're dealing with the order Lagomorpha and 2 families. The picas, the Ochotonidae, family Ochotonidae, and just 1 species that we got represented in lab here, Ochotona princeps. Okay. This is a monotypic family in that there's only one genus in it, but there are 29 species described, only 2 of which are found in North America. This is one of the pica specimens that we have in our collection. We have a number of others, but funnily enough, we have no skulls, which surprises me. I thought we did have skulls of this species, and I would love to show you a skull if we had one. But this is This is a pica. As you can see, they're not very big. Now I brought in a few other mammals for comparison here with size. Okay, you'll recognize this from the rodent lab. That's a pocket gopher. But look at the pocket gopher has a reasonable sized tail, whereas picas don't have any tail. And picas are really little rock rabbits, and they have kind of Mickey Mouse ears. You can see how round that ear is there. In the living animal there, they pop straight up on the head. Now, this is a full-grown adult. If you see, you'll see these in the mountains up in the Sierra Nevada on rocky slopes, and they're diurnal, and they call when they sit up on top of rocks, and alarm calls and watching out for predators. But this is the adult, and if there are juveniles there, they're going to be about half this size. They'll be more like the size of this animal, which you will also recognize from the last lab. Now, that is not a gopher. You'll hopefully recognize this as a California vole. But you can't really confuse any of these rodents with the pica. The pica is a very distinctive morphology. It's just a little bundle of fur with those rounded Mickey Mouse-like ears. There's no tail. It's diurnal. It'll sit up on rocks or scamper around between rocks as it collects vegetation. You can see it's about the size of a pocket gopher or a large pocket gopher, but the shape of the feet are different too. If you look here, you can see the feet. There's furry little rabbit paws on the rear of this this pica, and you'll see the same here with the front paws. You see they have a furred plantar pad, the big pad at the rear, but the toes are naked, and you'll see the same on the hind foot. Again, partially furred, but the toes are naked, and this gives them better grip when they're running around on rocks. So, but they're living in a fairly harsh environment, high in the mountains for the most part. And if by contrast, when you look at the gopher's feet, the gophers have well-developed claws for digging, especially on the forefeet. And the hind feet, they also have claws and more regular, like toes, rodent-like feet. But these are for kicking dirt out of the way as it digs. And then you have the vole, California vole, a grass eater, runs around in little grass runways. And then I brought out one other mammal that's about the same size as the pica, and that's one of our antelope squirrels. This is the San Joaquin antelope squirrel, Lagomorpha nelsoni. And you really can't confuse it. This thing looks squirrel-like, and it's got a big bushy tail that it brings up, a fairly big bushy tail it brings up over the back. It's got claws on its feet. In contrast, the pica is quite different. So that's the Ochotonidae, the picas, Ochotonidae. And this species, again, is Ochotona. There are about 29 species total of picas. And places in China and Tibet are famous for these. My friend Andrew Smith is a retired professor at Arizona State University, is a world expert on picas, and he worked on picas at the Bodie State Park as a graduate student. And he recently edited this authoritative volume on the lagomorphs, and you can see there's a picture of pica calling on the very front cover. There's also a picture of a few leporids in here, and I also wrote the section in here in this recently published book on our brush rabbit, the riparian brush rabbit is an endangered subspecies of the brush rabbit, which extends all the way from the Willamette Valley in Oregon to the southern tip of Baja California, but our subspecies is confined to the northern San Joaquin Valley. That's the riparian bush rabbit, and that one is listed as endangered. Also in the book is the desert cottontail. Now, these are the two cottontail species that we have at the San Joaquin River Refuge. So we're going to take a closer look at those now. Okay, so we're dealing with Leporidae, family Leporidae, the rabbits and the hares. And there are three species we're going to look at. We're going to look at the black-tailed jackrabbit, Lepus californicus. We're going to look at the desert cottontail, Sylvilagus auduboni. It's this one right here. And then we're also going to look at the Sylvilagus bachmani. Sylvilagus bachmani, the brush rabbit. Okay. So first we're going to take a look at the two cottontails. It's pretty obvious why they're called cottontails, because they have this group, this genus Sylvilagus, as has a cotton ball of a tail, but it's more pronounced in some species than in others. So let's look at the desert cottontail first. This is the desert cottontail, Sylvilagus auduboni, named after John James Audubon. Okay, now I want you to try to be able to tell these two species apart from photos and video. We're not going to bother so much with skulls, although you do need to know a leporid skull from some other mammals, and I'll show you a leporid skull shortly. But there are some distinctive features that set these two apart. And if you're out at the San Joaquin River Refuge and you see a rabbit jumping around, you will be able to tell them apart if you look for these characters. Okay? And you cannot use size as a diagnostic character by itself. Here you can see that the closer rabbit is the Sylvilagus auduboni, the desert cottontail, and the brush rabbit is on the far side from us here. So this is the brush rabbit, and this is the desert cottontail. But one thing you might be able to see from the video here is the fur of the desert cottontail. It has more yellow and orange in it, and a lot more variability in coat color. Okay, whereas the coat color of the brush rabbit, it's kind of a more uniform brown. See that brownish fur color all the way from the tip of the nose down through the back to the top of the tail. Okay. By contrast, if you look at the desert cottontail, there's a lot more variability in the coat color. There's more yellows and oranges and well, there's gray and brown and black even too, and other colors in there. But it's more highly variable. Also, the desert cottontail is typically bigger, but like I said, you cannot use that as a really good diagnostic character, because you can get fairly big desert cottontail or brush rabbits, or you can get fairly small brush rabbit. You can get fairly big brush rabbits, or you can get fairly small desert cottontails. So you need some other characters to tell them apart. And there are two really good ones for identifying desert cottontails, and you can see them here on this specimen. First one is the ear tips. The outer surface of the ear tips are colored black, where the point of my pencil is right now. Not the inner surface of the ear, the outer surface. See this black coloration at the ear tips? You don't see that in brush rabbits. See, they're uniform in color all the way to the tip of the ears. Now, this is more obvious in a living specimen than in a steady skin like that. So that's one really good diagnostic characteristic, morphological characteristic to tell the desert cottontail from the endangered brush rabbit. At least the species we have is endangered. The next really distinctive feature is the tail. The cottontail on Silvilagus auduboni is much more pronounced. It's bigger, it's more obvious, they flash it a lot more, and here you can see the size of it. This is the tail on the desert cottontail. Now it's kind of flattened down and turned ventrally in this prepared mount, but it's bigger proportionately than the brush rabbit tail. And here you can see the smaller brush rabbit tail right here. And also the desert cottontails are more out in the open. They'll run around on golf courses, for example, and places like that, where the brush rabbit is much more secretive and it hops around in or close to brush, and it doesn't flash its tail. Its tail looks more like a little white patch against its butt. By contrast, the desert cottontail, that tail is up high and it's often like this big cotton ball right on the rump of the animal. So that's how you tell them apart from the skins. They also move a little differently when you get used to seeing them. The desert cottontails move in a different way. It's hard to describe it without showing them to you in the field. And if you go out to the San Joaquin River Refuge and go for a hike along Hospital Creek, you just might see them. And just watch out for these dun-colored, smaller rabbits that kind of hop in and out of the vegetation. Those are likely Silvilagus bachmani. By contrast, if you see animals that are out in the open a lot and seem a little bigger, check for black field marks on the outer tips of the ears and check for a bigger cottontail, and that will be Silvilagus auduboni, the desert cottontail. Now there's also a much bigger lagomorph at the refuge, and that is the black-tailed jackrabbit, Lepus californicus. And you cannot confuse these animals, because here are the two brush rabbits, pretty compact animals, 500 grams or so, 500 to 700 grams. And here's this big guy. This is a jackrabbit. Much bigger animal, huge ears. Can't really mistake it, those giant ears. Very big, very long rear legs. You can see the length of the legs here, extending through the rear of the specimen. Also, it's called a black-tailed jackrabbit for a reason. See that big black tail? And they sit on their hindquarters and move around, hop around, but they can fly. They can travel. This is a male from Santa Fe Road outside Turlock. And it doesn't say when. Oh yeah, it was collected nearly 40 years ago in March 1981. It was probably a roadkill since it was collected on Santa Fe Road, and it was put up as a study skin. When I started on campus, working on campus in the early 90s, 1993, and on through to probably the early 2000s, you would see these animals on campus. But as Turlock became more and more developed, jackrabbits got excluded. This Lepus californicus got excluded because they're associated with farmland and rangeland. Farmers don't like them for the most part because they'll eat their crops and stuff like that. But they're pretty amazing animals. So lagomorphs are important. They're not as speciose as rodents, but they're very important animals in the ecosystems in which you find them, whether it's high mountain ecosystems where you find pikas or whether it's in desert or grassland situations. And here I've got a few skulls. I've got a skull of jackrabbit on the right and a desert cottontail on the left. And there's a few things that are very distinctive about their skulls here that you should be able to tell them apart. There's some good diagrams in your lab manual. Figure 143. There's some nice photos of leporid skulls. And the key thing to look out for to tell a leporid skull, well, there's a few things that jump out right away. Probably the first thing you'll notice when you take them up are all of these openings in the side of the rostrum. Okay, see all this openings here. That's what we call fenestration. Fenestra is the Latin for window. So there are all these windows in the side of the rostrum. You see it on both sides. The nasal bones, these are the nasal bones here, are very distinctive as well, and they're wider at the rear than they are at the front. Another very distinctive feature is that this process above the eye, the supraorbital process, it's fan-shaped. See this weird fan shape of the supraorbital process? You can see it there. You also see it, that's a jackrabbit skull. You also see that same process here on this supraorbital process on this desert cottontail skull. And then the other characteristic, skull characteristic that we talked about in lecture that is really, really distinctive in this species is they have two upper incisors. I'm going to try to zoom in here if I can. Okay, there we go. That's as good as I can get it. But you can see that behind the main incisors, there are two like incisors, vestigial or ancestral little peg incisors. And all lagomorphs have that. If I had a pica skull, you'd see that as well. It's only on the upper jaw. You don't see it, you can't see it here on the lower jaw. The lower jaw looks more like a rodent jaw, although the process is very different and it's often fenestrated. And then they have a tall cornoid. No, that's the articular surface. Sorry, the cornoid process is here. It's not that tall, but they have a very large angular process here. So those are the main features. The same thing here with this small one. This is the desert cottontail skull. Try to hold it so you can see that spare, that second set of incisors right behind the first one. So the for a leporid dental formula, if you look in your lab manual, dental formula is 2/1, 2 incisors on top, 1 on bottom, no canines, 3/2 premolars, and then 2 to 3 molars on top with 3 on the bottom. So they have 26 to 28 teeth. And the situation is pretty similar for pica. They have 26 teeth. 2/1 incisors, no canines, of course, 3/2 premolars, and 2/3 molars for 26 teeth for picas. But I don't have a pica skull, unfortunately, to show. Now, key thing I want you to remember here about these is we're dealing with a state and federally listed endangered species with the brush rabbit here, the subspecies that we're dealing with. This animal is only found out along the Stanislaus River at Caswell State Park, and also by in places now along the San Joaquin River, where we've reestablished populations over the last 20 years. We have a major recovery program that was involved in restoring this species, the Civilagus bachmani. And I actually authored an IUCN write-up in this global reintroduction perspectives for 2018. These are case studies from around the world. And if I could find a PDF of this, I I would provide it to you, but this is the document on the reintroduction of the riparian brush rabbit to the San Joaquin River National Wildlife Refuge. So that's an overview of the lagomorphs. I hope you found this informative, and this, along with your handout and lecture notes, should give you an understanding. But again, I've just shown you 4 species here: the pica, Ocotona princeps, 2 cottontail species, Civilagus bachmani, Civilagus auduboni, and the black-tailed jackrabbit. But there are 4 other native species, plus the European rabbit, exotic species here in California as well.